4:34 p.m. Daisy, Abby, and I had been sprinting for about 3 minutes when I realized something. I had no idea where we were going, and neither did anyone else. Meanwhile, we'd heard an engine start up, so we knew Barnaby Bradford was coming after us. We stopped in the middle of the woods. All three of us were panting hard. "My mom is going to be wondering where I am," Daisy said. "I told her I'd be home by 4:30. Then she looked at me and grinned. "Oh, well." I looked at her. "Aren't you even scared at all?" "Of course I am," she said. "I'm really scared. But also, this is the most excitement I've had in a long time." She bent down to scratch Abby's ears. "Besides, Abby's here and she'll protect us, won't you, girl?" I looked at the two of them and suddenly felt better. Why should I be scared? I had people and a dog who cared about me and would protect me, and I would protect them. We would protect each other. It's like Jonah Forrester always says, some things are worth fighting for. That was the line I always said from the roof at... Wait a second. That's it. "I know where we can go," I told Daisy and Abby. They both looked at me. "Out here, in the middle of nowhere?" Daisy asked. "There's an old abandoned beach club on the other side of the swamp. It's called the Boathouse," I said. "It's a neat place to hang out." "Cool," Daisy said. Then she scratched her head. "But what will we do there?" "There's a roof deck. We can hide there until they give up looking for us. Then we can go home and call the police." Abby, meanwhile, had spotted a squirrel and suddenly yanked so hard on the leash that my arm almost came off. "I see what you mean about Abby," Daisy said. "If she hadn't spotted that box of candy bars, we never would have found out about the diamond necklace. It was awesome. That was awesome." "Abby's awesome in general," I said. "Super awesome." And then before I could stop myself, I added, "And you're awesome, too." Daisy smiled at me. I smiled at her. It was super duper awesome. Then I remembered there was someone out there who wasn't awesome at all, and he was looking for us. "We should probably go," I said, feeling like an actual leader all of a sudden. "Okay," Daisy said, nodding. "Which way?" "I know a dirt road. It will get there faster. It will get us there faster." She frowned. "Don't we want to stay off the roads, though?" "Trust me, no one even knows about it." We cut through an old picnic area that still had a few broken down old tables sitting there like they were begging for people to use them. "See," I said, grinning as we turned onto the dirt road. It had so many vines and bushes growing over it that I didn't think any car could get down it anyway. "You were right," Daisy agreed. I was feeling really good about myself. Really good when I heard it. A car engine, getting closer. "Run!" I yelled, but it was too late. The van came screeching up. Mr. Bradford had spotted us. "That's enough!" he yelled. I glanced back and saw him get out of his van and come sprinting full speed after us. "Keep going," I said to Daisy and Abby both. "We're almost there." I tried to sound brave, but I knew that I'd made a big mistake by suggesting we take the dirt road. I'd gotten overconfident and careless. Hank Barlow or Jonah Forrester would never have let that happen. We scrambled up one hill, down another, and then there it was, the boathouse, looking as empty and deserted as ever. "Go around to the other side," I gasped, out of breath. "We'll go in the back way." Abby had been there before, so she knew exactly where to go. We used an old rusted-out canoe to climb up onto the porch. "The stairs are over there," I yelled. Abby and I ran ahead and Daisy followed. We turned the corner and suddenly heard a voice coming from the roof deck. "Uh-oh," Daisy whispered. "He must have gotten here first." We crept closer until we could make out the words. "Hello out there, it's me, King of the World." "Wait a second," I said to myself. "I know that voice." "Irwin," I called, "is that you?" I heard a scuffling above me, and sure enough, Irwin peered down from the roof. "Jimmy? What are you doing here?" I asked. "This is my hiding place, too," he answered, sounding a little annoyed. "What are you doing here, and why are you so out of breath?" "It's a long story," I said. "Is Daisy with you?" Irwin asked. "Of course." "I'm here," she called. That's all it took. "I'll be down in a sec," he said. "No," I said, "we're coming up there. We need to hide." But Irwin was already scrambling down. "Hide," he said, jumping from the last step. "From who?" "From me, I believe," said a voice behind us. We all turned around, and there he was, Barnaby Bradford, stepping onto the porch, drumming his pimply fingers together. Mrs. Craig was next to him, bald as a cue ball, looking like she'd have rather been anywhere else. Nice place you got here, Mr. Bradford went on. A fixer-upper, I see. Who are you? Irwin said. Oh, I'm the dog warden, answered Mr. Bradford. I've come for this adorable girl here. Want to hand her over? I picked Abby up. She was heavy, but I pretended not to notice. I saw her fangs peeking out. I petted her fur slowly, trying to keep her calm. It was like she was waiting for the right time to pounce. I was praying there would be one. Abby is awesome, and I'm taking her home, I said. I told Mr. Bradford as if I were talking to a normal person. My parents are going to wonder where I am, so we should probably go. Mr. Bradford's big sweaty hand patted the top of my head. Well, here's the problem with that, he said. I'm not so sure that's true. From what Agnes tells me, your parents aren't all that worried about what you're up to. Your mom works all the time and your dad's running around looking for a job. Who has time for unimportant things like children? He stuck his face right down in front of mine, close enough so I could smell the pickles he had for lunch. That's where my fine babysitting service comes in. I heard a small, soft growl from Abby. Shh. It's going to be okay, I whispered to her, even though I was starting to worry that maybe it wasn't. You're not taking her anywhere, I told Mr. Bradford. Mr. Bradford nodded, smiling. Ooh, feisty. He pinched my cheek so hard that tears came to my eyes, then put one of his pimply hands on Abby and started petting her fur. Get your hands off her, I said evenly. Fact. Sometimes bravery isn't exactly bravery. Sometimes it's more like stupidity. The next thing I knew, Mr. Bradford had picked me up by the shirt and was carrying me over to Mrs. Craig. Please keep an eye on him, he told her. I didn't mean for any of this to happen, Mrs. Craig whispered to me. Abby was supposed to stay home. I'm really sorry. A little too late for that, I told her, but she looked really upset, so I added, It's not all your fault. Mr. Bradford pointed at Daisy and Irwin. Have a seat, you two. They sat down on the old couch by the rusted-out fireplace. Mr. Bradford began pacing back and forth. Well, said Mr. Bradford, I suppose that you have a right to know why I need to take your dog. It seems only fair. I could tell by his evil grin that fairness had nothing to do with it. He just wanted to make us squirm. You see, he went on, knowledge can be a dangerous thing. And the problem is, you and your blotchy little face and your silly little friends and your ratty little dog know too much. Mr. Bradford patted Daisy and Irwin on their heads. Now, of course, I would never do anything to hurt you beautiful children, he said. That would be extremely stupid of me. I have a business to run after all. Then he turned and looked at Abby. Unfortunately, this poor little pooch here won't be quite so lucky. He grabbed Mrs. Craig's cane out of her hand and started using it as a walking stick. Here's the story we're going with. There was a terrible accident. It turns out your dog chewed up your mother's jewelry case, grabbed the necklace, and ran away. You chased her all the way to this place, and as you tried to grab her, the dog fell tragically off the roof to her death. Both dog and necklace lost forever in the swamp below. Please don't hurt the dog, Mrs. Craig whimpered. Quiet, Mr. Bradford thundered at his sister. We had it all worked out. The dog was a gift, a perfect excuse for you to quit that job, and a perfect explanation for why the necklace went missing. Dogs destroy, lose, or bury things all the time, don't they? It was a foolproof plan, and you had to go and ruin it by bringing that crazy dog with you today. That's actually a stupid plan, Daisy said. No one would have believed that. They wouldn't even try a plot like that on Stop Police, Irwin added, probably for my benefit. Oh, I used to love that show as a kid, Mr. Bradford said. I always wanted Hank Barlow to die, though, and he never did. You're a horrible human being, I told him. Perhaps, said Barnaby Bradford, but I'm a rich, horrible human being, and if any of you children ever say one word about what really happened here today, you will follow that dog into the swamp. I closed my eyes and opened them, hoping it was all a nightmare. It wasn't. You are going to pay for this, I yelled. Ah, but again, that's where you're wrong, Mr. Bradford said. I'm going to get paid for this. He started walking toward me. I was still holding Abby, and my arms were getting really tired. She started growling again. Give me that dog, Mr. Bradford said. Shh, I whispered to Abby. Everything will be okay. Abby growled louder as Mr. Bradford got closer. Hand her over, he screamed. That's when Abby decided to make her move. In one split second, she jumped out of my arms, bared her teeth, leaped onto Mr. Bradford, and clamped her jaws around his neck. Mr. Bradford screamed and fell down. Abby clamped harder, and they started rolling around on the ground. This dog's insane, screamed Mr. Bradford. He started flailing furiously at Abby. She's not insane, I said. She's a crime-fighting vampire dog. Fact. Sometimes it's better to just come right out and say it. A crime-fighting vampire dog. Ha! Mr. Bradford gasped. Then he grabbed Mrs. Craig's cane and whacked Abby right on the nose. Abby yelped in pain and let go of Mr. Bradford, who scrambled to his feet. Ah! He screamed, panting. Would a crime-fighting vampire dog cry and moan like that from one little poke? I don't think so. Mr. Bradford took out his phone and shoved it in my face. Look, he wheezed. There was a picture of a dog with a very fancy haircut. My dog is better than your dog. My dog is a thoroughbred Akita bred from a long line of show champions, and your dog is nothing more than a filthy, mangy mutt. Abby was shivering and whimpering. I think she was in shock. We both were. I bent down and kissed the top of her head. Are you okay, girl? I asked. She responded by licking me on the face, right on my blotch. Fact. Ordinarily, getting your blotch licked by a dog would be gross, but not in this case. Definitely not in this case. Here's what happened after Abby licked my blotch. The fur on her head tickled my nose and made me sneeze. The sneeze went right in Mr. Bradford's face. Mr. Bradford yelled, "That's disgusting," and furiously wiped his face with his hands, which made him drop Mrs. Craig's cane, which dropped next to my hand, which I picked up and used to whack Mr. Bradford's knee. "Ah!" he yelled. "You can say that again," I yelled. Then I smacked his other knee, and sure enough, he screamed, "Ah!" again. He fell to the ground, which gave us a few seconds to try and figure out our next move. "Let's go up on the roof," Irwin said. Daisy looked confused. "Huh?" "The roof," I said. "Why would we do that? We'll get trapped up there." "Trust me," Irwin said. "But why?" I said. Irwin stared at me. "Because I'm your best friend, that's why." Mr. Bradford, meanwhile, was back on his feet. "I've had it, you little brats," he said, wheezing. "Enough is enough." "I'm going to head up to the roof and call for help," Irwin yelled. "There's a house across the swamp. They'll be able to see us if we're on the roof." I still had no idea what he was up to. There wasn't a house anywhere near us. "Come up to the roof, Jimmy," he begged. Mr. Bradford started limping toward me. I looked at Irwin. His eyes were flickering back and forth from me to the stairs. I tried to figure out his plan, but I couldn't. "Would you please come up to the roof?" Irwin said to me, overemphasizing the word would. "Would you? Would you? Would you?" I had no idea until what he was talking about until I did. Would. As in would. "I got it," I shouted. "Daisy, Abby, come on." "Got what?" Mr. Bradford gasped. We didn't answer. Instead, Daisy, Irwin, Abby, and I ran to the stairs and charged up to the roof with Mr. Bradford on our heels. "Do you guys know what you're doing?" Daisy asked. We both nodded. 5 seconds later, Mr. Bradford made it up. He looked around. "Come on now, why would you kids try to trick an adult?" He looked at me. "Now give me that dog, and this will all be over." "I will never give you this dog," I said, backing up. "You're getting awfully close to the edge," Mr. Bradford said. "Give me that dog, now." I refused to look behind me because I was totally afraid of heights. "If Abby goes over the roof," I managed to say, "then I'm going too." Mr. Bradford sighed. "Well, I must say I'm impressed. Swimmy Jimmy, Baxter always told me you were a loser, but it turns out you've got some fight in you. Good for you. However, there's a point when fighting becomes useless, and I'm afraid we've reached that point." I knew that the edge of the roof was getting closer. In another 5 feet, I would be toast. Fact. There are 2 kinds of toast. There's the good kind with butter and sugar and cinnamon, and then there's the bad kind. I stopped backing up. Meanwhile, Irwin and Abby had moved to the other side of the roof next to the hot tub. Irwin nodded at me. It was now or never. I put Abby down. "Run to Irwin and Daisy," I said. Abby didn't move. I think she wanted to stay and protect me. "Go," I urged, but still nothing. "I've got you now," Mr. Bradford said gleefully. He reached out to grab her, but she slithered out of his grasp. Which is when Irwin yelled, "Some things are worth fighting for, but justice is worth biting for." I couldn't believe it. Irwin was quoting Jonah Forrester, and it worked. Abby started running, and then she jumped. And when I say jumped, I mean she jumped. She soared over Mr. Bradford and over half the roof toward Irwin. She was in the air so long it seemed like the black stripe of fur along her back was acting as a cape. She wasn't just a crime-fighting vampire dog. She was a superhero crime-fighting vampire dog. As she flew by Mr. Bradford, he tried to grab her, taking 2 steps backward, right onto the rotted plank of wood by the chimney, which broke. "Ah!" Mr. Bradford screamed as he fell through the brand-new hole in the roof to the floor below. Then crash! Mrs. Craig was still down there, waiting for it all to be over. She screamed, "Barnaby!" then asked, "Are you all right?" The only answer was a long, painful moan. "You might want to give him some kelp," I yelled down to Mrs. Craig. Daisy and Irwin ran over to me, and we all hugged. "We did it," I said over and over again. "We did it." Meanwhile, Abby was squealing with joy and giving me tons of kisses. "I'm so glad you're okay," Daisy told me. "You're not as glad as I am," Irwin told her, needing the last word as always. But this time, instead of being irritated, I just laughed. "You were worried about me?" I asked Irwin. "Of course I was worried about you," Irwin said. "You're my best friend." We went downstairs. Mr. Bradford was lying there with 2 hurt knees and bruises all over his body, cursing and howling. Mrs. Craig, meanwhile, was calling 911. I leaned down right next to the pimply-fingered crook who tried to take my mom's necklace, not to mention Abby. "My dog is better than your dog," I whispered in his ear, "and don't you ever forget it."